Okay, so let's talk about childhood. This is a pretty long time span, 3 to puberty. So there's a lot of development that's going to occur, a lot of really critical things that are going to go on between, toddler years really and then puberty. Across this span, we see increases in sexual interest. I've got a little picture here. What to do when your child has puppy love. Because, kids really young will realize that they're interested or attracted to or whatever a classmate or a peer playmate or something. They'll be interested in why the screen goes dark when mommy's watching soap operas. You're like, why does it keep going dark as soon as they kiss? Things like that. They'll be interested in kissing. They'll be interested in all sorts of stuff, and more and more and more across this period. Masturbation. This is when we start noticing that boys masturbate roughly twice as often as girls do. Girls, when they do masturbate, are more likely to do it in private, and so there might be activity going on that nobody else is around to document. Boys are more likely to masturbate in groups or in pairs or with other people. It's a touchy subject, and so a lot of times parents don't want to think about it or talk about it, but it's completely normal and natural for children to explore all parts of their body. They stick their fingers up their noses. They do all sorts of stuff that us adults know better than to do and wish that our children wouldn't do in front of people. But there's something about touching their genitals that makes a lot of parents really squeamish. But it's something that parents should probably talk about pretty just as forthrightly as, oh, don't stick your fingers up your nose. It's okay to say to children, you know what? When you want to touch yourself in that area, you need to go to your bathroom, into your bedroom. Something like that. Just really matter of factly, it's okay to talk about it. In this age bracket, we see a lot of sex play going on among kids, especially in the younger years, between 3 and about 8-ish. You see a lot of sex play going on. The key word here is play. You see genital inspection. This video from the internet, my son and his first girlfriend. This little boy doesn't know his dad is videotaping him while the little boy is, pulling down the mannequin's panties, pulling them up into her mannequin butt crack. Just doing all sorts of stuff to this mannequin. That's really normal for kids in this age bracket to just be really super curious about what's under people's clothes. It's not necessarily lascivious or lewd behavior that they're engaging in. They're curious. They want to know. So here we have, he wants to see what she has. Look, they're wearing pull-up. He's wearing a pull-up. And he's interested. What do you have, right? And she wants to see what he has, right? A lot of times they'll engage in imitations of stuff that they've seen on TV. So, like here we have a couple of naked kids, and then they're like, which one's the bird and which one's the bee? Like they know kind of the concept, but they don't know what's going on. They really don't know what's going on. So they do a lot of imitation of stuff. So they'll like smash their bodies together, and they really don't know what they're doing. They're playing. Really distressing to parents can be that it could be siblings that are engaging in these behaviors, and they think, oh my gosh, my children are incestuous. Well, when you've got a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, they're not, one's not a predator and the other one's not prey. It's not victimization. It's two kids who are exploring things and are curious. It could be partners of either sex. It doesn't mean anything. Even if your friend is the same sex that you are and you want to inspect their genitals, it looks different from your angle than it does from theirs, right? So it's purely curiosity. It's nothing necessarily negative. So what should parents do when they react to when they catch their kids engaged in some kind of sex play? Acting shocked or disgusted can contribute to later sexual problems. It can cause kids to feel ashamed of what is very natural behavior and very normal developmental stuff. So you probably don't want to overreact. Like if you walk in on I heard one story once where 2 5-year-olds, one was male and one was female, were playing, and they quietly shut the bedroom door where they were playing, and so the adult went to check on it and discovered them with their pants down and looking at each other's genitals. And so the parent grabbed the little boy, he was the visitor, grabbed the little boy by his arm, pulled his pants up, and marched him home and told his parents what a little pervert they had and that he wasn't welcome to come play anymore and he's a bad boy. And then came home and punished the little girl. for her part in it and made everybody feel really, like horrified and ashamed of the whole thing. That's an overreaction. That's not a healthy reaction. It's normal for kids to explore, and so the better response is to not really react at all. To be more like, you know what, you guys need to keep your clothes on and this door open, okay? So why don't we come get something to drink and then you guys can play with this some more. But keep your clothes on, okay? You're like really light and like nothing bad happened, but this is not what we do, right? Let's keep the door open, okay? So a calm response like that is associated with more positive attitudes, especially if one of the children is female. Females really internalize messages where they should be ashamed of their curiosity or their response to sexual stuff. So it's really, really important, especially if you have a little girl, to be really calm. Now, how calm? I heard another story. This was from a student who told me that she was babysitting her little sister who was around 5 and her playmate who happened to be male and was also 5. So same basic scenario as the previous story I told you, but here's where it's funny because my student was only like 18 years old. She's babysitting the kids. And same thing, she heard them suddenly got quiet. So she gets up to find out what the kids are up to and the door's shut. So she opens the door, sees them pants down looking at each other's genitals, and being an 18-year-old, she's like, "Oh, sorry." And she shuts the door and starts to leave. And then she's standing in the hallway going, I don't think I was supposed to have left them in there. So she opened the door and she did the very right thing, which was, "Hey, you guys, let's all get dressed again and let's make some popcorn," and just sort of distracted them, did something else, and didn't say anything about what they'd been doing, just changed the subject. The first story that I told you, the adult was like, well, those parents needed to know what their son was up to. And that's something that a lot of times parents struggle with, about whether they should tell the other parents what happened. But if you're giving those parents updates about everything that's happening, it might be reasonable to give them an update on something like that. But unless you get the sense that one of the children, and usually they need to be at least 2 years older for this to be true, unless you get the sense that one of the children is indeed victimizing the other child, you've got a child who's crying, or you've got a child who seems to be being restrained, or something like that, it's probably consensual. It's probably two kids being curious, and probably there's no reason to consider it anything other than the other imaginary play that they've been engaging in. Children who have been molested or other kinds of things sometimes will act out by molesting younger children like that, but they rarely engage with children of their own age. And usually the child who is being victimized is in some distress. And so that's a really good sign that something more than play is happening in this interaction. How about adolescence? Okay, so we've reached puberty. Ooh, puberty. We all remember that, right? Good times. I always like to try and get my students to guess what would be the first outward sign that you would be able to detect in a young adolescent that they're starting puberty. And it's really fun because usually they come up with all sorts of other things and not growth spurt. But growth spurt is actually the first outward sign that the person has been exposed to their first big dose of their sex hormones, and they're starting to transition from child to reproductively capable adult. Now, reproductive capability is going to be years in the future, because it turns out this growth spurt happens probably 2 years before the onset of actual changes that will make them reproductively capable. The growth spurt could be in height. In the US, we kind of favor that pattern because then you stay thin or get even thinner. But for a lot of us, we go weight first. And so you build up a little bit of extra weight and then you shoot up in height. Either one is completely normal. It's been being normal the person's entire life. In infancy, parents are hardly ever concerned about their infant gaining weight. But when it's a teen or a late childhood person and they start to gain weight, parents can sometimes start to panic and think, oh no, this is the beginning of childhood obesity or something like that. If you've got a child who's been within the normal ranges of weight their whole childhood, and now they start to get a little heavier than average without having grown yet, give them a second because they're going to start growing in a little while. And so it's probably puberty related. And making them feel bad about it during this period, oh, you've got to eat less, or you need to really start exercising because you're gaining a lot of weight. They can really internalize that, and that can formulate a really negative body image over their lifetime. So, with a lot of things in parenting, ignoring stuff is a really good approach. Not say anything, but hey, let's go ride our bikes is way better than, boy, you sure are gaining a lot of weight. You need to exercise. Now, this is not weight gain picture. This is the changes in the genitals that are, this is what doctors are trained to look for to determine whether their pediatric patient is starting to enter puberty. And so you see, prepubescent males and females in the top row, and you see the prepubescent nipple pattern on the female on the right. And then we start to go down. We're starting to get the beginnings of puberty very early on. As the female starts to be exposed to hormones, her breasts will start to develop breast budding, where you can see that the mammary tissue starting to swell underneath the skin. And then you see the development of pubic hair and so on until we get to adulthood, and we see the full pubic hair pattern, full growth of the penis and the scrotum and stuff, and the full development of the breasts. The average age of onset of puberty, as measured by the growth spurt, is about 10 for girls. So I'm not talking about menstruation or anything like that. I'm talking about the growth spurt. It's going to occur at about 10 for girls and about 12 for boys. So this is that beginning of that awkward stage that we all went through in late elementary school into middle school, where the girls tend to be bigger and more developed than the boys, and everybody feels bad about it. So what's going on? Okay, so puberty is that transition from childhood to adulthood. And biologically, the primary sexual characteristics are going to focus on the reproductive organs and the external genitalia. These are the changes that have to happen in order to make a child who can't make children into a biological adult who could reproduce. So here we have some see-through naked people. And what we're interested in here is the reproductive organs. So in her, it'll be the ovaries, the uterus, the beginning of menstruation. For him, it's going to be the growth of the penis and the testes, the beginning of ejaculation, that are going to be these big primary sex characteristics. They're triggered by changes in the hypothalamus that then tell the pituitary gland to start those cycles of follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone that we talked about in a previous chapter. So these are the things that have to happen in order to make these people reproductively capable. For girls, the big sign that these primary sexual characteristics have begun is menarche. Menarche is the first menstrual period. For American girls right now, it's about 12 and a quarter years of age for the first period. But if you go back in time, in 1995, it was like 12 and 3/4. In 1890, it was like 14 and 3/4. So across time, we're seeing a younger and younger onset of menarche. In fact, if you go back to 1850, it was the average girl was more than 15 years old when she started menstruating. So a lot of people are really curious about what has triggered this earlier onset of menarche. People have looked at things like hormones in our food because, as you know, a lot of meat and things have hormones in them. But this trajectory started long before they started adding hormones to meat. And in fact, if you look cross-culturally to other places where they don't eat farmed meat, like our favorite little enclave of people who really haven't been influenced by the outside world, Papua New Guinea, they eat game. They aren't enhanced with hormones, and their menarche is earlier than it had been 100 years ago. And that's in part because they aren't only eating what they catch anymore. They're buying food at the grocery store. They're less likely to starve. So one big hypothesis is not about the hormones in the food we eat, but just in the content of what we eat, just the volume of what we eat today. In 1890, little girls did not build up body fat as early as little girls today do. Little girls in 1890 had periods of deprivation in their diet much more commonly than we have today. They didn't have as many nutrients in their diet. They ate less of everything. not just meat. They exercised more than we do today. They had to walk farther to get to school. They had to go fetch water from the spring. They had a lot of things that they had to do that kept their body fat lower and their muscle mass higher. Turns out that you need a minimum of 18% body fat to menstruate. And there seems to be like this critical balance for most women. If they, once they reach 5 feet in height and 100 pounds in weight, they'll start menstruating. That seems to be like a critical thing. Now, you know people who are shorter than 5 feet and they menstruate. You know women who weigh less than 100 pounds and they menstruate. So it's not a guarantee, but that's sort of like the rubric. Once you get to 5 feet and about 100 pounds, you probably have the body fat present to menstruate. And girls are reaching that target earlier than they used to. Now, once menstruation happens, it doesn't mean that you automatically are immediately fertile. Usually, girls don't menstruate for the first approximately year of menstruation. It's not a guarantee and it's not a form of birth control to assume that the first year is a free year. It's just, you can't reliably expect necessarily for a girl to be completely fertile that first year of menstruation. Now for boys, we call it Spermarche, and this is when they first start producing live sperm. Usually we notice that through their first ejaculation. It's possible that they're making sperm and not emitting it, and it can be tested in a blood test. But, most boys don't have the motivation to figure that out because most boys will find out through their first ejaculation that they've reached maturity. On average, this is going to happen about age 14. We basically assume it's about 2 years later than girls because starting with the growth spurt, we see this 2-year disparity on average. We have to kind of guess with Spermarche because nobody really asks boys, when was your first ejaculation? They may not even know when their first ejaculation was because it might have come in a wet dream, right? When they were sleeping, what we call a nocturnal emission. So a lot of times boys don't even know when their first ejaculation was. They don't get asked. Women, their entire lives will be asked, how old were you at menarche? For the rest of their lives, they will be asked that. Boys, men are never asked that really. And there's not like a big transitional thing that happens either. Like girls need supplies once they reach menarche. So they have to tell an adult that this happened. Whereas with Spermarche, boys don't ever have to really say anything to anybody. And so we guess it's about 14. It might come, like I said, in the form of a nocturnal emission, which is when you ejaculate in your sleep, or what people call a wet dream. Okay, let's go ahead and take a break here and we'll come back and talk about secondary sex characteristics in the next segment.